Hey everyone, I'm Alison Butler, and my guest today is Jessica Cox, who is a confidence and success coach. She helps women create success on their own terms, and she specializes in going after your goals and overcoming fears, which is amazing. So, welcome, Jess. So happy to have you here.
Hi, Allison. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, usually when I kick off these interviews, I always ask you to tell us a little bit more about your personal story. Tell us about your life and kind of what has brought you to doing this work.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, where to start? Well, I myself have always, I guess growing up, I always lacked confidence. I kind of struggle with my confidence. Um, and I really held myself back in a lot of ways. And, when I went to university, I found myself struggling with depression and anxiety, and it became a really low point in my life. And in high school, I was always a straight A student and thought that I would go on to go to university and, I don't know, create this really amazing life, I guess, and be quote unquote successful. And then I ended up in university and really struggling and just wondering what my life was going to look like. And so I struggled for a lot of years. I ended up having to go on medication. And I guess through that kind of started my own personal development journey and really trying to figure out how to take care of myself. And um, yeah, that's the biggest thing, I guess, like how to really take care of myself and start to implement things that could really help me and support me. And it's been a big journey. I'm still learning. I think it's a journey that never ends. But through that, I started to find my confidence. I started to find things that work for me, that help me to show up for myself and for everyone around me. And so I've always had a passion to help others. And just through my education and jobs, I was helping others, but I guess never in the way that I kind of envisioned. I wasn't truly fulfilled. And so then that was another bit of a struggle for me, was really figuring out, okay, what is it that I want to do? Which led me into getting my life coaching certification and being able to help people in this capacity now, and realizing this is truly my passion and what I want to do. And because I think it's so relatable, because I feel like I help like women who were me 5 years ago or so. And I can relate to so many things that I want to help women with. And so yeah, I guess in a nutshell, that's kind of a little bit about me and how I got here. And it's been a wild journey. I moved away to Edmonton for 8 years, and that was a whole learning process as well. And I've been back living in Newfoundland for just over a year. And so there's been lots of transitions and yet another stage of figuring out what works for me and finding a groove. And so it's always a journey.
It is always a journey. And, one of the reasons why I find your work and your key messages so interesting is because in my work, I talk a lot about becoming, a better version of yourself or a good version of yourself and not just kind of going through the motions of life, right? And you talk about doing new things and trying things that scare you and just kind of going for it. And to me, those two things are really interconnected. So, what's kind of your approach with going for it?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't always that way. Like I think I mentioned previously, I used to hold back in a lot of ways. I didn't take risks. I think, in reflecting on my journey and really struggling with depression and anxiety, in my early 20s, I look back now and I think I had a lot of those tendencies when I was younger. I was always really nervous about things, but I didn't share that with others. And I think there was things that I struggled with that I really kept to myself, and I didn't know at the time what that was. But looking back now, I can see maybe there were tendencies towards me having anxiety and things like that. And so I held back in a lot of ways because I was always really nervous. I wasn't confident in myself. And so I never wanted to put myself out there or try something new. It was absolutely terrifying. But what I've learned over the years, and this is just my journey, and as someone who's struggled with confidence, I used to kind of just think, someday I'll wake up and maybe I'll be confident. Like it'll just hit me. And just kind of wishing for that confidence to come. And what I realize is that if I want the confidence to come, I have to take action. So it's through the action that you actually build your confidence. And so for me, it's been a whole process, but there's been a number of things. And that's one of them, is learning that, the confidence comes through that action. The other part is learning that it's okay to try and not be perfect at something right away, like kind of taking this pressure off. I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I think I used to have this idea that, I don't want to show up and do something and kind of be fumbling and struggle with it. Right. Because I didn't want other people to see that. It was like, if I'm going to do something, I want to be good at it right away. And just kind of, learning to be okay with trying things and getting uncomfortable. And I don't know. And I think just having fun with it, like, I think it brings so much fun. And you can just, you can learn to enjoy like doing something that's uncomfortable and like kind of challenging yourself.
Yeah. What would you say to people? Because I think there's definitely a piece there of not worrying about what other people think, like for example, this year I got a skateboard. I'm turning 40 and I never like put my feet on a skateboard before. The first time I did it, I fell flat on my back. I do have safety gear, by the way, for anyone who's listening to this. But there's this whole element of that, of like having to not worry about what other people think. Like I kind of had to joke around with my neighbors and be like, well, when you see me out there, like just this is what I'm doing. And I mean, that maybe that's a really bold step for a lot of people, but what do you think about, the self-talk or the things that we tell ourselves around that whole showing up for ourselves imperfectly or being willing to try new things? Like, how does how we talk to ourselves make a difference?
It makes all the difference, in my opinion. And it's been one of the biggest things that I have had to work on is my self-talk. And I was someone who was so critical of myself. I was definitely my own worst enemy, worried way too much about what other people would think. Would I beat myself up if I didn't show up perfectly, or if I couldn't do something completely the way that I wanted, then I think, what's the point? And, just this really negative self-talk. And then a lot of times it would just spiral into this really negative place. And what I've learned is I won't say you can't change through shaming yourself, because I think you can, but I don't think you can create lasting change. And you're not going to be happy along the way. You might make changes in your life, but you're going to be really miserable because you're constantly beating yourself up. And so, I've had to learn to be kind to myself. When others say, like kind of, if someone were to ask you, would you talk to your best friend or your spouse or your child the way you talk to yourself? I think a lot of people really need to stop and ask themselves that question. Because I think a lot of people are really critical. And when you really stop and think about the answer to that question, I think a lot of people would probably have to be honest and say, I would never talk to somebody else the way I talk to myself, right? I think we can be so hard and so critical on ourselves. And so asking, like, how can I start to be kind to myself? And it takes effort. I think it's a conscious effort, first of all, to be aware of how you're speaking to yourself.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. Like, I wonder sometimes how aware we even are of how critical we are of ourselves, you know?
Yeah. And even when it comes to, like, Alison, you asked about like trying something new and doing something new, stopping sometimes before you go into that situation and just trying to be really aware of, what am I telling myself right now? Right? Is it that, oh my gosh, I'm going to look like a fool. Everybody will laugh at me. What if I fail? I couldn't possibly do this. Right? Like, if that is how you're talking to yourself, once you become aware, I think then there's the indication, like, you can't change anything if you're not aware. So that's the first step. And if there's a lot of that negative self-talk, that has to be an indication that something has to change, right? And so I think just being kind to yourself, like affirming that it's okay to try something. Who cares what other people think? And I think it's easy to say, like, who cares what other people think? But it's not so easy to actually,
you have to work on
live
it,
that.
right?
But once you start putting in the work and being kind to yourself and really think about, what do you want for your life? Why is this important to me? Why do I want to do these things in the first place? Right? I think when you can become really rooted in that and what you believe and what you want for your life and your vision, I think that's part of what starts to help you care less about what other people think. Because when you're really rooted in what you want and what you believe, you start to realize that you're in control of that. And you're not going to give up that control to other people by worrying what they have to say.
That's so powerful. I loved something that you said before, about how you thought you would just wake up one morning and feel confident. And I think we've had a similar conversation, you and I, about this before. I felt the same way about a lot of things connected to my mental health. Like, I thought maybe one morning I would just wake up and want to get up early in the morning for a morning routine, or like, I thought that one day if I was doing enough, I would just want to exercise every day. And a huge lesson for me has been about the consistency and putting in the work on bettering myself, and that it doesn't all, you don't always like want to necessarily. And I know a lot of people struggle with consistency for anything that they're working on, like working on goals or working on anything around self-care or improving themselves. A lot of people have really good intentions of making time for themselves, but then life gets in the way. So do you have any tips around consistency?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that. And I think there's a few things. So the biggest things that have helped me, right? That's only ever what I can speak to, is like what has helped me on my journey. But definitely that self-talk. So, if you set out and you have these intentions, sometimes maybe life is going to get in the way. And I used to really beat myself up over those things. And through that, it would just become this really negative spiral where now one day of not doing something turns into several days, weeks, like literally months, Allison, right?
Yeah, never doing that again. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, really getting a hold on that self-talk and not beating myself up, just giving myself a little bit of grace and saying, okay, it's a day or whatever. I'm going to show up again tomorrow because this is important to me. Right. And so really not allowing myself to go into that negative spiral. And then the other thing with, like you said, having good intentions, right? And we can all have really good intentions around things, but like, do you have a plan? Like, do you know when you're going to show up for yourself? Like, it is implementing more exercise into your life or whatever the thing is. Like, do you have a plan? Like, this is when I'm going to show up for myself. So I think when we're more, we can have the intent, but when we're intentional about how we're going to implement these things, I think that can make a huge difference of, this is what my day looks like. This is a priority for me. So like for me, my morning routine and getting up early is a huge part of my self-care, taking care, like having that time to myself. And so I have a plan for that every day, right? And am I perfect? No, but I like it's important to me, right? And I prioritize that.
It helps to have the intention. And
Yeah.
I think for anyone who follows you, like we know it doesn't always go perfectly because sometimes I see that your daughter like gets up early
Yeah.
and she's there with you or whatever, right? But I think that's part of being human is sort of knowing, okay, this is something that I want to do. If today didn't go as planned, well, I'm gonna get up tomorrow and like it's a new day. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is like, are you making it a priority in your life? I think it's easy to say I don't have time or I can't do this, but I always talk about if you automatically say I don't have time, you're kind of you're accepting that as like final. There's definitely no time, right? You're kind of shutting your brain down to any possibility of finding time because you've accepted I don't have time. And I talk about instead kind of switching that and asking, okay, how can I make the time? Because then you kind of open your brain up to possibilities and you can start to evaluate and you're like, okay, maybe I'm doing this thing over here that I don't really need to be doing. Like I'm scrolling through social media for this amount of time in a day and I can really dial that back, or you start to become aware.
Yeah.
And I think like, yeah, just asking yourself, is this a priority for me? And looking through like how you're spending your time. This is not to dismiss that, you may be busy, you may have a lot going on. I think that's the case for most of us, but I think what makes a difference is getting real about where you're spending your time and what is a priority. Because I think most of us, if we're getting honest with ourselves, we're spending a lot of time or money or whatever the resource is, right? We're spending it in things that aren't serving us and helping us to be the person we want to be or reach the goal we want to reach. And so I think it's getting honest about some of those things as well.
I agree. And I think so many of us are so quick to say, I'm so busy or I don't have time, because it's like, I often feel like out there in the world, it's like a competition of who's the busiest, right? Like
Yeah.
so many of us wear that with like a badge of honor, like I'm so busy. But it is about really, really slowing down and breaking those things down about what you really want. That's so great. Thank you. Just because so much of my focus is around mental health and well-being. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your journey in your life. What's one thing that you would share with anyone who might be having a hard time right now, maybe feeling like they're struggling with their mental health or well-being, or just kind of feeling stuck?
Yeah. I think that really depends on where you're at, and maybe,
Good.
If you're in a place where you need help, like being okay to ask for that, because I've definitely been in that place before, where I was like really struggling and really stuck and almost like could not help myself. I needed that outside help.
The addiction to
Um,
mental health. Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
And that's okay.
So Yeah, totally. And so seeking that out if you need it. But I think in the day to day, even some day, like, I have my days.
Me
Um, and actually, if I'm being honest, this is kind of a little bit of a day for me. Like I'm just, I don't know, feeling in a little bit of a funk, like slower going and not a lot of like drive to get things done. And I have days like that every now and then.
Yeah.
And so I kind of give myself grace and I ask myself, okay, how can I show up today? If I can't show up fully the way I want to and I would like to, how can I show up? Maybe what's one small thing I can do for myself today? And like movement is a huge thing for
Yes.
me, right? Moving my body. I used to move my body because I wanted to change my body. And I had such a poor relationship and then with myself and so I'd exercise for a bit and then nothing changed with my body. I still hated it. And so I'd stop. And it was just this roller coaster. And then I realized I was missing out on this huge piece of like how movement makes me feel
Yeah.
and the mental health benefits. And I was like, this is what I need to focus on because when I move my body, I feel really great. And so when I started to focus on that, like that's what helped me even to become more consistent with that. So really moving my body on a regular basis. And honestly, Allison, it's been a journey over the years of just finding like what works for me. So I think it's really individualized of like, yeah, just really figuring out what works for you. If it's like, I think everybody benefits from movement, but like other things like journaling, or do you just need to maybe take a hot bath and read, or like, you know what I mean? What do you need today if you're
Yeah.
feeling stuck that could just help you and like take care of yourself, right? Think about if a friend was feeling down, like how would you maybe show up for them? Like what types of things would you maybe offer to someone else that maybe you could offer to yourself when you're struggling a little bit?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that and for being open about how you feel today. I've had one of those days this week also.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think I always encourage that too, right? For people to figure out what if you feel depleted, what helps to fill you up, right? Or what could be like a small boost today, and then we can try to build upon that, you know?
Yeah.
I love that. So I want you to share before we finish up where we can find you if we want to learn more about you and just anything else that you want to share with everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. This is really wonderful. And I think the biggest thing I would say is just give yourself the time that you deserved so that you can figure out the things that work for you and what serves you best because again it's so individualized and I think it's so easy to get caught up in there's a lot of information out there, right? And I share what works for me. And I used to be someone who would look to other people and be like, okay, if I'd look at you, Allison, and be like, okay, Allison's doing this. I have to do that just like she's doing. And I
Mm,
think sometimes it's being aware, like, well, what works for you might not work for me, but maybe what could I learn from it? Like what lesson could I take from what Allison is doing? What could I try to implement? And then putting your own approach to it, like figuring out how that fits into your life, right? And not getting too caught up in, well, this is exactly how I have to do it and how it has
yes.
to look. And just, yeah, going on that journey to like figure out what works for you. Um, and yeah, if you want to find me, you can find me. I'm mostly on Instagram, so at Mrs. Jess Cox. And yeah, I love connecting with people. So I'm always open to like if someone wants to say hi, have a chat. I
No,
love
I
that.
think that's actually how we met.
Yeah.
Talking to each other. I love it. And I'll put your contact, I'll put that links in everywhere where I post this as well. So thank you so much for joining me today and chatting a little bit more. I hope everyone found this really helpful and interesting. I know I did. and have a great day.
Thanks, Allison. Bye.
Bye.